Every single day, there's significant humanitarian operations in Ukraine. I've mostly focused on the war fighting and the soldiers, but wanted to be sure to shine a light on these incredible volunteers as well. So today we're chatting with Anton, Yaremchuk, and Christopher Loverro about humanitarian aid operations in Ukraine. Anton is the co-founder of BaseUA, a Ukraine-based humanitarian organization, and Christopher is a U.S. Army veteran and volunteer who's traveled to Ukraine 5 times to work with Anton, his team, and other Ukrainian aid organizations. We talk about how NGOs, or non-governmental organizations, fill in gaps where the government may not be best suited to help, how they coordinate civilian evacuations close to the front, and, of course, the risk facing these brave men and women as they try to help those in need. You can learn more about these heroes in the description below, where we'll also have a link to donate to support BaseUA if interested. And with that, let's get to the conversation. Christopher, Antonio, thank you guys so much for taking the time. We haven't talked with anybody on the humanitarian side of this war, but it's a major effort day in and day out. So really appreciate you taking some time to walk through all this. So if you wouldn't mind, just kind of, I think a good starting point here would be, what is BaseUA? That'll give us some context for some of the more detailed conversation we're going to get into.
BaseUA is a Ukrainian local NGO, started more as a grassroots initiative in 2022. Literally tens of thousands of people, just really reacted to what was happening around, and there were lots and lots of initiatives. Most of them kind of slowed down after a while once things were a bit more predictable and stable. We kept at it, and at this point, it's a small institution. We are based in Kramatorsk since the very beginning, and our main resource and kind of value is that we have had an uninterrupted presence on the ground since 2022. We constantly have teams on the ground that provide emergency response. Most importantly, first-line evacuations from the hottest spots in the region. That's really our kind of focus in terms of the emergency response. We have armored vehicles, with jammers, very experienced and prepared teams, and we are very much embedded in the overall coordination structure in the region. But we also have many other projects at this point. We do run a cultural center in Kramatorsk as well for kids and teenagers. We have art camps for teenagers that have been either displaced because of the war or remain in frontline areas. We host that in the western part of Ukraine. We have a primary healthcare unit, which is a mobile unit that serves villages that are hard to reach, or villages that kind of fall through the raster of bigger organizations. We do some rebuilding efforts. We also have a different organization that helps military. So at this point, it's all a broad kind of range of things, because once you start working in a specific community, the humanitarian approach that is required has to be kind of holistic, because people, they don't need just one thing. They need sustainable solutions. And so, we're still at it, and trying our best to just kind of serve the communities.
Yeah, but
did I hear you say you guys run armored vehicles for taking people out of the hotspots? Did I hear that correctly?
Fairly recent.
No.
Well, the fact that you have those at all, that's interesting.
We don't have only armored vehicles, but we have 2 armored vehicles since 2022, yes. And unfortunately, we've had 2 incidents with both of them. Maybe I would assume you're aware of Edward Scott. He's our volunteer who lost an arm and a leg in an FPV bombing. That was our car on an evacuation mission. Both vehicles now are repaired. One of them is back in the game since quite some time, and the other one we're going to bring it back to Kramatorsk tomorrow, picking it up from Kiev currently. So, but we have other vehicles as well. It's a kind of big logistical system. So it's not just about these shorter runs in the frontline areas, but also longer distances and stuff. So but we do have armored vehicles, yes.
Yeah.
Chris, you're getting ready to say something. I cut you off there.
Add to what he said and just give a perspective of an outsider, a volunteer. I'm an American veteran, and I was with them back in 2022 when they were doing the evacuations out of Bakhmut in the early stages when I would go out our team didn't have an armored vehicle, and things were quite different back then. But I've been coming back. This is my 5th trip to Ukraine, and I've been working with Base off and on for 3.5 years almost. So, my perspective has always been that they fill the gaps. There's a lot of agencies here. The UN is here, but the scale of need was just so epic that you needed these small grassroots organizations willing to do the work in the most dangerous areas. And there just weren't a lot of people doing that. And especially like the UN and some of these organizations, they're not allowed to go work in the Donbas because it's too dangerous. And so you have, what I witnessed from the beginning is how civil society just kind of stood up spontaneously and started supporting the military and doing humanitarian work. And organizations like BASE were there from the beginning, doing some of the most dangerous work, filling those gaps. And the other thing about BASE that I would like to point out is, just to, touch upon some of the points that Anton made is, it's a very holistic approach. So, they don't just evacuate people from these places and then drop them off somewhere. They think forwardly, like what kind of care do they need? Where do they go? The children, COVID hit for 2 years and then the war hit. So some of these children haven't really been in a classroom for years. And the effect of that, of their social development is pretty drastic. And so they have these art camps where they take people from the war zone. They were going to the Carpathian Mountains and just letting them be kids again for a couple of weeks. And it wasn't just a vacation, but they also give them tools. They do art therapy and things so that when they go back to where they live in the war zone, they're a little better equipped to deal with what's going on. So the art camps, the evacuation mission, the training, the mobile medical clinic. I did a piece on their mobile medical clinic, and they go to these places where if not for them, people wouldn't have medical care, no access to care. I mean, imagine what that would be like. We all take it for granted. So they're filling all of these gaps. And as someone who's been a volunteer for them, it's just, I can tell you, it's just incredibly inspirational.
You kind of you answered a question I was going to have there, which is where does this fit? Because it seems like there's things you're mentioning that should be government support, but I guess as you get out to portions of the East, they're not able to provide or maybe can't get into some of those areas. Like you mentioned the UN, they just straight don't go into the Donbas at all.
But they can't do the type of work that we do because they can't get that close to the front line. They do those missions as well sometimes. Actually, just relatively recently, they had a convoy going into Pokrovsk, like at the end of June, I think. But that's obviously something that they have to prepare for a very long time, and they need to make sure that they went through all the notification procedures and everything in terms of safety and security is in place. So they do play an important role. And the UHF, the Ukrainian Humanitarian Fund, which is money coming from the UN, is very active at this moment. And slowly, the typical cluster systems, the humanitarian cluster systems that UN usually establishes in all the conflict areas where it works, or generally areas that need humanitarian assistance, is starting to become a tool here in Ukraine as well. At the beginning, it was very difficult because you had overwhelmingly such a huge amount of people that started doing this work, but the absolute majority of them weren't trained humanitarian workers. So it was very difficult to incorporate them into existing systems. So it was very powerful, very impactful, but also very chaotic. And there was a lot of resource kind of waste because things were just happening in parallel. Parallel structures were built, even in terms of evacuations, you had 5 cars going to pick up 5 people rather than 1 car just going to a few addresses and things like this. We've developed, the country really progressed on that level at this point, and most of these really just people that were involved at the beginning, either they incorporated into existing organizations that grew, because there were lots of organizations that have been founded in 2014 But by 2022, they were kind of stable, but also relatively small, maybe doing human rights advocacy or things like that. But they had structures, they had bank accounts, they had non-profit status. So then suddenly when 22 happened and there was a huge influx of money, they had the structures to absorb that. So we have lots of organizations that were existing, but that were relatively small, that became huge by 2025 or even 2023, 2024. So many people who wanted to stay or maybe even change their life path and become a humanitarian worker were absorbed by those organizations. And then there is a smaller amount of organizations that were founded in 2022 and that still exist. And BaseUA is one of those. So we did kind of in this turbo regime, from 2022 to 2025, we had to learn as we went, and from a grassroots initiative, we had to become an institution to incorporate into this now halfway managed and coordinated effort that is happening on the ground. There's lots and lots of issues still, but it's much, much better compared to 2022.
I remember hearing stories at the beginning of the war, like February, March of 22, where Americans or just anyone from around the world would show up in Kyiv like a backpack and say, "I'm here to help," which is awesome, right? Like, good on them. And wow, they made the trip and they're there, but just walking around the streets asking somebody, like, what can I do? Like, I don't know, man. Who are you? It's nice to see. I'm sure plenty of those folks stayed and have kind of incorporated into places where they can actually help. But you mentioned an influx of money from the United Nations to help with some UN programs. How does that affect you guys? Do you guys have access to any government funding? Are you entirely run by donations?
We don't have any government funding. We have a mix of different sources. It's direct donations. It's some specific fundraisers. There are specific people that try to fundraise for maybe a program that we're trying to fund. But the kind of routine structure costs are covered by grants. So yes, institutional support. So we apply to humanitarian funding programs and we receive that funding. Obviously, it's never enough. It is always a project to project kind of struggle because these funding schemes are short term. And they are pretty specific in terms of what you can spend the money on. So it is a complicated process, but I mean, we're still here. So obviously it is kind of working out. But yeah, I would say 70% is these grants. So institutional funding, partially also this UN money. We usually be in a compact organization on the ground. We usually receive it as part of a consortium. So, there might be a bigger organization that is managing a consortium of several organizations, and we are one of those, and we receive the money. But that was all. That's all nice because at this point we do have all the administrative structures in place also to manage all those processes. So we know how to do reporting, we know how to spend this money correctly and how to manage it. And so, for example, next year we are going to apply also for that direct UN funding. So not as part of a consortium where we receive it through another partner, but where we start working directly with UHF. Because at this point, through all the experience and all these different programs, we have a system in place that can accommodate the due diligence processes and the requirements that UHF, the UN, for example, has. So yeah, it's a constant progress. But it's difficult. It's very difficult. There's a lot of money, but it's never enough because most of it is very conditional, and there's so many things that you can't pay for with it that you constantly have to try to find other sources, and there's never enough stable funding to have this administrative apparatus the way it's supposed to be. So everyone in the organization has to multitask on a very unsustainable level, to be honest. We all work in the field and then come back and work till deep in the night, kind of the administrative office computer work, and then go out in the field in the next morning, and so when people look at our Instagram page, they think that we have 60 people working in the office, but it's literally 15 of us who do everything you see there.
They work 60 hours a day.
That's wild. Yeah, a lot of coffee. Man, well, we will link your organization in the description below. I know we've run a bunch of fundraisers for military units and for soldiers and guys on the front, and of course that stuff is needed and necessary and urgent. But I do get feedback from folks where it makes them a little uncomfortable donating to anything, even when we talk medevac vehicles or life-saving equipment. There's an odd feeling about donating to a war effort. So we'll try to point some people your direction. This is purely life-saving, purely humanitarian.
Yeah. There is generally it's a quite difficult, I think, unprecedented situation here, because the majority of humanitarians in the country are Ukrainians, and they have to walk this very thin line of remaining impartial in terms of the humanitarian work they do. But on the other hand, obviously, as a person, they cannot be impartial because it's their country that has been invaded, you know. That's why, for example, we have two completely separate organization, and one only does the humanitarian work, and it's strictly following all the humanitarian laws, both internationally and Ukrainian. And then we have another organization that is completely detached, through which we support the military on a relatively small scale. But yeah, it's important to kind of separate those two. And we obviously also encounter a lot of that people would rather support humanitarian initiatives, although there's never enough resources for the military. And to be honest, even if you want to save lives, you're much better donating to a military cause, because the sooner Russians lose this war, the sooner the killing will stop and less people will actually need the humanitarian support, you know. So as counterintuitive as it might be, but in this case, it's actually quite straightforward.
Yeah, we've had many discussions about this, you know, that it's come up that people want to donate, but they don't want to donate to anything that's considered military hardware or equipment. They want to donate to the humanitarian realm. And, you know, my response to that is, well, ultimately, what are you trying to do? Your goal is to help Ukrainians. And the best way to do that is to stop this war as soon as possible. And the best way you do that is you give them the bullets and the gear and the intel and everything they need to defeat the Russian army. So in the end, of course, the humanitarian needs are great. But if you look at the bigger picture, the best way to help Ukraine is to help them stop this war as soon as possible.
You mentioned that a lot of or almost all of your workers are Ukrainian. Is there a way, because I know so many are going into the military right now, is there a way where they can do this and work with a humanitarian organization in lieu of military service?
Yes, on paper, but de facto, very few organizations do that. You can basically reserve your workers, but it's a relatively tricky system, because let's say you have 10 male workers. You can reserve 5 of them, but you have to give all the information on all 10 workers. And so that usually means that you will reserve 5 workers, but the other 5 will be drafted. You know, I'm oversimplifying it, but generally most of the organizations actually avoid that. Also because if for some reason because they reserve your worker, let's say for half a year or a year, and if for some reason after that year you cannot confirm the critical importance of your organization, those workers that were reserved, they will be definitely mobilized first, because the rationale is, you know, you had your time, others are already at the front line, you were reserved, you were doing something important, now the criticality is not there anymore, so welcome. So it is very possible, and obviously it is a bit more complex than I'm currently defining, because there is a lot of humanitarian demining work, for example, and also a lot of civilian actors do that, and there it's different. There everyone who does that can be reserved, because they're doing something that is very relevant. So basically, yes, it's possible, but it's in our organization we only had one person that was reserved. And with him, exactly what I just described happened. He was reserved for a year, and just 2 weeks ago, actually, for some reason, because the system constantly changes, and every couple of months they kind of reshuffle the databases. And although he was reserved till the end of the year, for some reason through, like, once this reshuffling was happening, this status was not confirmed again, and the day the status was not confirmed, he got drafted, and he's already at the training camp. So it's a kind of double-sided situation. There's not enough people, like businesses, NGOs, military, everyone lacks human resources. It's a really, really difficult situation. So it's understandable. There's just not enough people to do all of the work that is needed, both at the front line and the rear, in humanitarian organizations, just running the economy. There's just not enough people in Ukraine currently to respond to these overwhelming demands.
How do you make those decisions then? Because there's always more people needed. There's always more things that need to be done. How does Base figure out that you're running evacs today or you're setting up a medical clinic tomorrow? How do you process all of that and prioritize
Mostly, we are very flexible. That's also one of our, I think, main resources and values. Basically, we constantly reassess the situation, and we are embedded in the communities. We are on the ground 24/7. And that's like, that's just a huge benefit because, for example, 2022 was a year where evacuations were top priority. Then at some point, 23, it was not a priority anymore because the front line stagnated completely. Mm-hmm. So most of the people that wanted to evacuate have left. And so we basically stopped evacuations. We always had everything in place and we were able to restart at any moment that is needed. And sometimes we would do a couple of missions, but then we concentrated more on other things. Most of the time, all of this runs parallelly, which is very difficult to manage, to be honest, because we don't have enough people. So it is just constant multitasking. It is also kind of nice because everyone in the organization basically can do any job. Like in every project, everyone has work. So we have people who can, go, like they know how the mobile clinic system runs, and they can go on the mission tomorrow, the day after they can do evacuations, and on the weekend they can host a workshop for kids. Which is great, but
it's like the military model of cross training.
Yes, for special forces, but it's also
they're the special forces of the humanitarian world.
There we go.
But everyone is completely burned out. It's just because we have a great team. We have people like Chris supporting us since such a long time. And all of that really kind of just keeps recharging us, but
they're tired. They're tired.
But to be honest, everyone is completely
the whole country's tired.
Yeah. So.
I'd be interested on that from your perspective, Chris, because you've come and gone a couple times.
Yeah.
So I know. Well, Anton's so in it that I'm sure you can see the trend of how things have gone. But from your perspective, Chris, how has how is it looked?
The first 4 trips were here within the first year and a half of the full-scale invasion. So I was here, my first deployment, if you want to call it that, was pretty much right after the invasion. And I just kept coming back over and over again throughout the first year and a half. So it's been a year and a half, 2 years since I've been here. And there's a distinct change. So, the first year it was the Wild West. Everybody was coming. You would go to these hotels in Lviv and it'd be just filled with foreigners, journalists, media, volunteers of all sorts, because it was like the cool place to be, I guess. And now you go to these places and there's no one. I mean, you don't hear any foreign voices. And, it seems like the people that are still here are still coming back are the ones that are they truly do care about Ukraine. And, if I can get philosophical for a moment, I think one of the reasons I keep coming back, other than why we're here, which is to fight the genocide, right? Allow me to take some liberties here for a moment. I've been to 40 countries, been all over the world practically. And there's just something about the Ukrainians, because when you're a nation at war, you see the best and the worst of people, and you see how people act and react when they're under siege, right? When they're being invaded and when genocide is being committed against them. And when you see how everybody just spontaneously steps up in the civilian sector and does whatever they can, no matter how small, they're doing something. Most people are just filling that gap, so to speak. And it's I mean, it's incredible. And I think before we went live, you talked about maybe giving an example, a real world example. So to speak to the spirit of the Ukrainians and the volunteers here. So we were doing evacuations in Bakhmut, and I think I was there in October of 2022. And when you're working near the front, the closer you get, you go through all these military checkpoints. And the closer you get, the more checkpoints. And there was always this one checkpoint that we would clear before we would enter Bakhmut. And we would pull over, have a couple cigarettes, recheck our equipment, put on our body armor, and then we would go. There was usually never any radio traffic at that point. And once we got into Bakhmut, there was no radio traffic. If it was an emergency, only the Russian speakers could get on the net. So we were getting our gear ready, and we get radio traffic. And I thought, that's odd. And we were informed that the village we were going to was just hit, and the Russians just killed 2 Ukrainian tanks. And so I said in just a very matter-of-fact voice, oh, well, I guess we have to abort, right? I mean, I guess we'll try tomorrow. We're going to have to abort. And I was expecting some feedback, like, yeah, we're going to have to abort. And there was silence. And so I kind of looked back at our team leader and Kevin Cohen, our medic, and he said, well, there's still people there that need to get out. And then I looked at our team leader, who was a 23-year-old Ukrainian civilian, who I think was an IT guy. And he said, yeah, there's still people there that need to get out, and that's why we're here. And I thought, my God, I mean, I was in the military, I served at war, I was a police officer, I was on a SWAT team, and I just felt like I was surrounded by the bravest people I have ever encountered. And then Kevin said, hey, look, this is the thing, this is our policy. If at any point any team member feels it's too dangerous, we abort, no questions asked, no debate, no discussion, we just go back and we try again tomorrow. And I thought, wow, that's an incredible policy. And then we talked it out, and I said, long story short, we went anyway. But the point is that the bravery of these civilians volunteering to do this work is incredibly inspirational. And that's just one anecdote of 1,000 experiences I've had with Ukrainians and with the foreign volunteers.
I think something that doesn't land well with a general audience unless they're keeping up with the war is when we look back in previous conflicts, you have humanitarian workers and they've got the maybe blue vests on, or they've got the Red Cross on their shirt, and those are non-combatants, and you don't touch non-combatants, you don't shoot in their general direction, they're protected. That's not the case here. Is that correct? You guys become targets the minute you move
twice,
within.
I think we were going up to Seversk. On the way up one time and on the way back, our humanitarian vehicle that we were in was targeted. And both times we were literally running the gauntlet, so to speak. I was driving a Sprinter van. It wasn't armored. The road was pockmarked everywhere, so I was afraid of a blowout. And rounds started exploding on both sides of our vehicle. And I'm pushing this van as fast as it can go. And then another artillery round blows up in front of us. And I'm looking at burning shrapnel on the road, and I'm just trying to squeeze the vehicle to get through it. And they absolutely are targeting ambulances, humanitarian vehicles, of course, civilian targets in general, hospitals, schools, nurseries, apartments. We do not use the term genocide lightly. If you look at the United Nations definition of genocide, there's 5 main categories. This fits all of them. This has been a genocide. This has been a genocidal war since day one.
Do you mark vehicles when you go in, or is that counterproductive?
Like safety and security in general is really our top priority, and the issue is really quite deep and large because of the nature of this war. It's very difficult to separate civilians and combatants. For example, where we are based in Kramatorsk, obviously there's a lot of military there because they cannot concentrate in a big army barrack. because it would get bombed the same moment. So they have to spread out, so they just occupy vacant houses. They basically look for any opportunity. But civilians remain there, humanitarians work there, and so we're all very much kind of fused together. The same as goes for all the traffic on the roads. And I think it is obviously true that Russians do not care, and they do commit war crimes every day, and they do hunt for civilians, because we do see that in Kherson, for example. But on the other side, it is also true that Ukrainian military has to, because of the lack of resources, because of many, many objective issues, has to use, for example, whatever vehicles they can get. So you do see Ukrainian military driving a school bus, or also unmarked ambulances that just look as an ambulance from outside. You cannot say that it's a military ambulance. So it's just generally a very, very big, and it's becoming a catastrophic issue, because the usual separation of civilians from the military just never happened here. Obviously, I'm talking about the frontline areas. And currently, it's becoming absolutely unsustainable because of FPV drones, because we don't have any notification and coordination systems in place. I mean, they do exist. The UN does notify, but there is no feedback on the other side. Russians have left any type of coordination systems in 2023. And also because at the beginning, the majority of people doing the humanitarian work on the ground never even heard of notification and coordination systems. Back then, where maybe if everyone has tried to do it en masse, it would have been more difficult for Russians to just step out of it later. But because nobody was using it, they just completely abandoned it. But at this point, it doesn't matter what type of protection you can get on your car. It's becoming really, really difficult to access certain areas. And if we continue at this rate, then in half a year, huge areas, for example, in the Donetsk region, will be totally inaccessible for the majority of the workers on the ground. Because again, armored vehicles, jammers, all of that just cannot protect you from the amount of drones. So currently, for example, as BaseUA with many partners, we are doing a lot of advocacy work, and we are working together with OCHA and UN and INSO in trying to actually put in place or reactivate some kind of notification and coordination system. We obviously we don't hope and don't expect this to get to a point where we might have like green corridors or actual cessation of hostilities for certain periods of time, but at least to try to get to a point where we can reliably notify specific units, Russian units on the other side, that we are going to Konstantinivka on a daily basis for 5 hours. This is the route. These are the vehicles. Don't target them with drones. If we can make that happen, that's going to be a game changer. And if we don't make that happen, then very soon, tens of thousands of people will be completely cut off from humanitarian access, because currently in Donetsk region, every single road that we use, even those that are 40 kilometers from the front line, have been targeted by FPVs. So they do reach them. Obviously, it's not like 15 hits every day if you get farther, but just a couple of hours ago, one of our vehicles was driving back to Kramatorsk after a whole day evacuations, and there was an FPV drone just on this road that is literally 38 kilometers from the front line. And so if it keeps progressing the space, as I said, doesn't matter what kind of protection you have. If you can't separate humanitarians from the combatants in some kind of reliable ways, then we really have a huge issue.
Preston, I don't think I finished answering your question earlier about what the difference I've seen, how this has evolved from the beginning. And before I came here, I was coordinating with Anton and some other folks to, hammer out my mission here. And I keep hearing them use the word catastrophic. And no one ever used that word before when I was my first 4 trips here. And I mean, I don't know, you were using it, and other people were using the language that the situation is becoming catastrophic. And so it's like, you're right. I mean, if pretty soon some of these areas, they're not going to be able to get into. And then you're going to have thousands of people that are stuck there.
The frontline is just becoming a very abstract concept. It's not a frontline anymore. It's a front area, and it's already at least 40 kilometers deep, 20 kilometers on each side. It's tending to get to a 60 kilometers range, and it will just increase. Obviously, with the mother drones, dropping the drones already, bigger drones flying in like 5-10 kilometers to the other side, and then dropping smaller FPVs. Then this big drone works as an antenna with optical fiber now having 40-50 kilometer range, and so on and so forth. So yeah, this is really becoming completely unmanageable and unsustainable. The rest risk that we have to accept on a daily basis is becoming completely inadequate. You cannot take that risk because obviously it's not just about us, but it's about the people that we're saving. And I need to be sure that when I'm telling them it is safer for you to evacuate with me than stay here in this basement, I can't lie to them. They trust me. So that's really a big problem because especially when you have people on board, it's also becoming very difficult. And both times for 3 years we had 0 incidents, and then basically in summer 24 it started to become an issue, and by the end of the year it was really a full-blown out crisis. And at the end of the year we had the first incidents, and at the beginning of 25 the second one.
By incidents you mean casualties?
Both times hit by FPV drones. The first one we actually were hit by 2 FPV drones, but we were very lucky, and we had one lady that was injured but minorly. And the second time we were hit by just one FPV, but not that lucky at all. And Eddie lost his arm and his leg in the process. But because also of the amount of energy and time we put into the preparation of the teams, his life was saved, which was really not a given. He had really severe injuries, and it was a question of minutes, So even in that situation,
outside of base, within the larger community of the evacuation community, we have lost people. Other people have lost limbs. People have died.
I believe it. It's important work, and it's interesting to think how it's getting more dangerous as time goes on. I mean, again, we hear the stories from the soldiers of trying to move in and out of frontline positions, and how it used to be relatively simple, like so long as the artillery wasn't there and the aircraft weren't overhead. But now it's like arguably more dangerous to get there than to be there in some locations.
While you're moving, moving in a vehicle is the most dangerous thing you can do at the front line. Yeah.
Didn't you do a series of interviews recently with some foreign volunteers with the Azov Battalion? Wow.
Yep, one just went up earlier this morning.
God bless those guys. God bless those guys. Yeah.
Good dudes. It's impressive what they're doing. They make me feel old. They're young, running around all day, every day, staying up late. They're texting at hours that, like, I got to look at the clock and be like, what time is it?
Preston, well,
it's just like they don't
we already
sleep at all.
We don't sleep over here.
I'm figuring that out, yeah. Well, on that note, the soldiers are working 24/7 as well, or the 60-hour weeks like Anton, or 60-hour days like Anton team. This might not be in your guys' wheelhouse, but do you do anything in terms of kind of veteran rehabilitation or helping soldiers when they come off the battlefield, whether they're wounded or not, to kind of, I don't know, get back to some sort of normal life?
We're starting to move into this because this is actually becoming a priority for the humanitarian sector. And it's very, very welcoming, obviously, to see that because, yes, veterans are considered, obviously, civilians. And so now more and more also like financial programs are opening up to support these projects. So currently we don't have anything specific that we do as an organization, but we are preparing projects, and I'm pretty confident next year we will. But yes, there are lots of initiatives. Obviously, bigger organizations have even whole departments doing just that type of work. like Pratula Foundation.
Superhuman in Lviv.
Superhumans, obviously. I mean, that's like, they're a big medical center.
They're very well funded.
Yeah, they're a big medical center, but also organizations that do different types of things. Don't just work with veterans now, are starting to have problems like that. So yeah, there's a lot of that happening, and more so. So yeah, it's actually nice to see.
Love that. It's going to be nonstop for a while here. That's it's exhausting. And I know I'm from the outside looking in, so I can't imagine what it's like there, but it's exhausting to think of how much work that will be, and you can't even put your efforts towards that quite yet because there's so much else that needs to be done right now.
I'm actually kind of positively, not surprised, but I'm really happy to see that it doesn't seem like we're pushing those problems into the future. There's a lot happening. There is there's a very, very big acceptance and respect also towards people with disabilities, with amputations, whom you see daily everywhere. So I actually it seems like we're probably more mature as a society than I expected. I am hopeful that in that specific kind of front of problems, we actually will probably be able to deal with it better than I like, because when I'm thinking about that, or when I was thinking about that at the beginning, the aftermath of the war will be even worse than the war itself, and partially also because of this, because we have such a huge veteran community. But actually, because it really is like a national army, 90% of people who are serving are just regular people who yesterday were working in a coffee shop, in a business center, running whatever activities, and now they're all in the military and have done it for many years. That I think the link between the military and the civilians is much closer than it might be in other countries where most of the people fighting have been doing that as a career and maybe exist a little bit outside of the kind of regular civilian society. So huge issues, but there's a lot happening as well.
It's great. Sounds positive. Chris, were you about to say something there, sir?
No, I'm just absorbing. I haven't been here in a couple of years, and it's kind of surreal just to see how things have changed. But to see one of the changes is just how much the Ukrainian military, government, and society have been able to constantly adapt to this war. Just going back to the initial phases where everybody thought that Kiev would fall in 3 days. Now here we are, 3.5 years later. The Russians are at 1 million casualties. They only control maybe 20% of the country. So how is that even remotely possible unless you're dealing with a society and a people that, first of all, have the will to survive and can adapt? And to be able to do that and to see that happen throughout the course of the last 3.5 years is, again, it's just inspirational.
Inspiring is a good way to put it. Of course, again, guys, we're going to link the BaseUA website and all of their information in the description below. Anton, Christopher, thank you guys so much for what you're doing. This is it's an honor to talk to you, people doing this kind of work.
It's our pleasure.
I really appreciate you taking the time.
Should we tell them how to say thank you in Ukrainian? You say it. No, let me try. Let me botch it first. Дякую.
Дякую.
Дякую. We'll get it the second time. So thank you again so much to Christopher and Anton for taking the time out of their busy day to talk through all of that. I learned a bunch. Again, I've been so focused on the war fighting and the soldiers that I haven't spent the time that I've needed to really look into the humanitarian side of things. So it's eye-opening. I mean, I think we've all known that they certainly put themselves at risk, but hearing some of the stories from Anton and Christopher really drove home just how dangerous their mission is and how important it is day in and day out. Again, if interested in learning more about BaseUA or contributing to their ongoing efforts, you can find a link to their organization in the description below, as well as some more information about Anton and Christopher. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.